A very pleasant day to you, Miss Vedelistoy, and to our fellow classmates. We are excited to have you here and discuss with you our topic in this presentation. We are Group 6, and we would like to present to you our topic, Freud's personality.
Today's presentation covers three objectives. By the end of the presentation, we should all be able to separate the ideas of the three personalities while still knowing why they are associated. The audiences should be able to give grounds for the following concepts.
In 1923, Freud's personality theory saw the psyche structured into three parts, the id, ego, and superego, all developing at different stages in our lives. These three elements work together to create complex human behaviors. The id, ego, and superego have most commonly been conceptualized as three essential parts of the human personality. Each component adds its own unique contribution to personality, and the three interact in ways that have a powerful influence on an individual. Each element of personality emerges at different points in life. Although each part of the personality compromises unique features, they interact to form a whole, and each part makes a relative contribution to an individual's behavior. And now, we will discuss and go deeper on the three major components of Freud's personality. Before we start, our group would like to share with you who Sigmund Freud is. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, a clinical method for evaluating and treating pathologies in the psyche through dialogue between a patient and a psychoanalyst. He is also one of the major intellectual figures of the 20th century.
The first component, the id. The id starts from birth and is driven by instinct, desire, and need. The pleasure principle, the need for instant gratification of our sexual and violent urges, drives the id. The id is the most instinctive and primordial aspect of a person's personality, a part of the unconscious that holds all of our desires and impulses, including the libido, a kind of generic sexual energy that may be used from anything from survival instincts to art appreciation, is a component of the unconscious. The id is also tenacious since it exclusively reacts to the pleasure principle, as defined by Sigmund Freud. The sex life according to Eros and the aggressive impulse according to Thanatos, as well as all inherited components of personality present at birth, are all part of it. The id is the impulsive part of our psyche that reigns directly and immediately to basic wants. The id is the impulsive component of our psyche that reacts to urges, needs, and desires in a direct and immediate manner. The newborn child's personality is all id, and it is only later that an ego and superego emerge. Because it is not in touch with the outside world, the I function this remains juvenile throughout a person's life and does not alter with time or experience. Because it functions in the unconscious region of the mind, the id is unaffected by reality, logic, or the everyday world. The pleasure principle, according to Freud in the year 1920, states that every eager impulse should be realized as soon as possible, regardless of the consequences. When the demands are met, we feel pleasure. When they are not, we feel unpleasure or tension. The id engages in primitive, illogical, irrational, and fantasy-oriented primary process thinking. This type of process thinking is selfish and wishful in nature and has no understanding of objective reality. The fundamental method is to create a mental image via daydreaming, fantasizing, hallucinating, or any other method. When you're thirsty, for example, you might fantasize of a tall, cool glass of ice water. You might start thinking about ordering your favorite dish from your favorite restaurant while you're hungry. This allows you to cope with the stress caused by the cravings until you are able to realistically meet those requirements.
Let's move on to the second component, which is the ego. According to Freud, the ego develops from the ID as it helps ensures that all the ID impulses will be expressed in a way that is accepted in the real world. This component functions in the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious mind. Our ego is guided by the reality principle. This principle works in a way where the ID's desires are met through realistic and socially appropriate manners. before acting on or rejecting impulses, the reality principle considers the advantages and disadvantages of an action. In many circumstances, the ID's urges can be satisfied through a process that's called delayed gratification. The ego gradually submits to the action, however, only at the right time and place. One of Freud's ways to demonstrate how the ID and the ego work together is by this example. Let's say the ID is a horse and the ego is the horse's rider. The horse is obviously providing the power and motion, while the rider is responsible for the directions and extra guidance. The horse will wander off on its own and do whatever it wants without a rider, like the ID without the ego. Many decisions will be made impulsively through the ID without any moral guidance from the ego. I'd like you guys to picture yourself in this example by pretending to attend an important but long conference for work. You notice that you're getting hungrier every passing minute as the speaker drags his speech. While the ID may be urging you to get up and race to the canteen for a bite, the ego reminds you to stay put and patiently wait for the conference to end. Rather than indulging on your cravings, you spend the rest of your time daydreaming about eating a sandwich. Only when the meeting ends, you finally go and find the thing you are visualizing and satisfy the ID's request in a true and reasonable way. So, with those given examples, you can see that secondary process thinking helps the ego release tension caused by unmet urges. The ego looks for an item in the real world that matches the image in the mind made by the ID's primary process.
In Sigmund Freud's idea on what consists of a human psyche or personality, it is split into three parts: the instincts, which is id, reality, which is ego, and the one that I'm going to discuss about today, which is morality and superego. So what is superego? Superego is there to suppress any urges or desires of the id. It suppresses our carnal desires or anything that can be considered morally wrong, since the superego focuses on the morality part of our human aspect. But superego focuses on morality over realistic things, making us rather rational. The superego forces us to side towards what is right no matter what the situation we are looking at. This can lead to us having a close-minded view on many things. So, what can happen when we side too much with superego? Like I said earlier, this can narrow our way of thinking. It can lower our perspective, and it can make us very judgmental and ignorant sometimes, because we tend to turn a blind eye to the real situation that is happening, since we judge it as morally wrong, and since the person is sided towards superego so much, they tend to neglect the reality and become sometimes delusional up to a degree. Since the superego's function is to control its impulses, especially those to what the society forbids, such as sexual sexual urges and aggression towards others, it really focuses on perfection rather than reality. That is why having a balance of id and superego is very important, especially today when we need to have an open mind and an open perspective to many things that is happening around us, especially at our age since we are becoming adults.
And that brings us to the end of our presentation. To summarize, the three concepts are connected because human behavior is created through the interaction of the id, ego, and superego. The id makes the demands, the ego provides the realities wants, and the superego adds morality to the activity. If anyone is interested to know more about the topics discussed, feel free to visit these websites. Again, This is Group 6 presenting Freud's personality components. Thank you and have a great day.